popular thing. Just 5 minutes later in the speech, he blames Trump for everything that went wrong.
Yes, there's this kind of relationship
By the time I came to office, the Taliban was in its strongest military position since 2001,
do we plan to send
controlling or
those
contesting
to
nearly
Vegas
half
to
of the
San
country.
Diego, since we have more
Previous administration's agreement said that if we stuck to the May 1st deadline that they had signed on to leave by, the Taliban wouldn't attack any American forces. But if we stayed, all bets were off. So we were left with a simple decision. Either follow through on the commitment made by the last administration and leave Afghanistan, or say we weren't leaving and commit another tens of thousands more troops going back to war.
So lame. This is so lame, dude. Either take responsibility or don't. I think it's in your political interest to say it's all you and the buck stops here, but pick a lane. Pick a lane. You know what else is lame? Is calling them the Taliban. Taliban was funded by Pakistan. You speak English. Taliban. Pakistan. So he says, my predecessor made a deal with the Taliban. Right, he made the deal. He ended the war. So now you don't get credit for ending the war. No, but I made the decision to end the war. Well, you just said that Trump made the decision. No, I made the good parts. I want credit for the good parts, but I want him to get responsibility for the bad parts.
It's one of the reasons I was thinking that it would be sent to
So,
San Diego.
okay, what is he actually saying Trump did? Trump made a deal with the Taliban to end the war in Afghanistan. He said we'd be out by May. So why weren't you out by May? Wouldn't that have, if that was the deal, wouldn't that have minimized all of this risk, all of this chaos, all of this rush, all of this question of how much you're overstaying the deadline that you agreed to? Get out by May. So he couldn't get out by May, bungled that, and he tries to get out by August, and it's a complete catastrophe. Then he's even less. Unfortunately, this is the kind of language we always hear on Afghanistan. Because it's a divisive issue. Do you want to stay there forever and we're just gonna, go in there, America, glass the place, we're gonna own it? Or do you want to get out? Do you want to say, who cares? I don't care about that backwater, that godforsaken tribal land. Get out of there, bring our troops home, build a nation build back here in America. What is it? Even the conservatives are just but and Joe Biden can't pick a side because Joe Biden is not a conviction politician. Joe Biden is an puts his finger up, he figures out his way, and then depending on that day, that hour, that minute, that's the position he's going to take. So now he's just a record go. Get out of Afghanistan. We've been there too long to make a case for staying in Afghanistan.
Mrs. K, we are not done with you yet. Commander-in-Chief, I firmly believe the best path to guard our safety and our security lies in precise strategy that goes after terror where it is today.
Okay, so he's talking tough. We're not done with you yet. I mean, we are. We're leaving. We're gone. But does anybody believe that? No. Then he says, pay attention to the words here. ISIS-K, we're going to fight terror where it is today, not where it was 2 decades ago. What is ISIS-K? ISIS-K is the offshoot of the Islamic State, specifically in Khorasan, it's Afghanistan, and parts of Iran. We're a Afghan terror group. We're not going to fight terror where it was 2 decades ago, which was in Afghanistan. We're going to fight terror where it is today, in Afghanistan. Except we're leaving Afghanistan. Yeah, that'll show him. That'll show him. Just completely incoherent. This man has soup for brains. And it's not because he's senile. He is senile. He's obviously in decline. He obviously can't stay up past 6 o'clock, which is why he gives the afternoon speeches. And he clearly can't do those very well either, because he shows up late to them. They're trying to get his energy up. He can't read the teleprompter. The speech was more slurred than even they usually are, which is a bad thing. Bad thing when the leader of your country is like this. Reminds me of Chernenko, one of these premiers at the end of the Soviet Union who lived for about 6 weeks. He can barely read that. It's pathetic. It's pathetic, and it's not good for the country. Not good for him, Biden, not good for the country. But when I say he's fit for wrong, I'm not saying it's because he's in the front. He's always been all that smart. He used to lie about his academic record because of this, because he graduated at the bottom of his class. He's just a glad hand. He's just a backslap. Just a simple smiler, hey, I'll go fix the pothole. He is not up to the challenge of our foreign policies. That's why he doesn't know. This isn't really Trump's fault or his fault, or Trump's accomplishment or his fault. Is it good or is it bad? Is it a great success or is it a terrible failure? Are we going to leave Afghanistan or are we going to stay there? Are we going to fight there or are we not going to fight there? What is it? They don't know. They don't want to take a position. Now, there, of course, there's going to be terrorism in Afghanistan. Yemen, Africa, there's terrorism in a lot of different places. The organizers know about how you fight it. There is terror at home. Do you remember last year when BLM and Antifa terrorists burned property down city to city to city, targeting civilians? The definition of terrorism. It has encouragement and sometimes financial support of elected Democrats, one of whom is now the Vice President of the United States. Remember that? So these Antifa guys, the BLM guys, they're not just running in the streets throwing Molotov cocktails into people's storeroom. They're also in the classroom. There's a people who Project Veritas has an undercover interview with a member of Antifa who is a teacher at a school in Sacramento who doesn't even hide it. It turns out he actually flies an Antifa flag in the classroom.
Like 180 days to turn them into revolutionaries.
How do you do that? How do you scare the out of them?
Sacramento is an organization that is under the banner of Antifa is very loosely organized, right? So that, when there's like right-wing rallies and stuff, like we like we'll create an opposition to that. Yeah.
Where would you go to connect to some of these organizations?
I post a calendar every week. And then so like and I do it for extra credit. So the good thing for me, like so that's encouraging them to do it. And I've had like students show up for like protests, community events, tabling, food distribution, partial voting. So when they go, they take pictures, they write up a reflection. That's their extra credit. Like I have an Antifa flag on my wall. And a student complained about that, and he said it made him feel uncomfortable. Well, it's meant to make fascists feel uncomfortable. So I don't really know what to tell you. Like, maybe you shouldn't be aligning with the values that this is antithetical to.
Yeah, maybe you shouldn't support America. Salute the American flag. You shouldn't support the American president when it was Donald Trump. You shouldn't. If you do that, well, this is not going to align with our flags, right? Yesterday I mentioned the teacher who has her students in the pledge of allegiance pride flag. Pride does like it's one of the more colors and sex and race and whatever. We'll get to her in a second. There's an update on her. She is like Uncle Sam compared to this guy. She's like George Patton, for goodness sakes, compared to this guy. I said with her that she should be fired, but she shouldn't be thrown in jail. She shouldn't be ostracized. This guy, I don't know. I think we should get a little tougher with this guy. I don't think like William F. Buckley Jr., founder of the post-war conservative movement, I don't think this guy has any right to stay out of prison. I certainly he should be fired. He should not be teaching. But if you're a member of Antifa, I don't think you really have a right to stay out of prison. I don't think you really have many rights. You're a member of a terrorist organization that openly seeks to overturn our system of government and that is actively engaged in acts of terror and regularly does that. I don't think you have very many rights at all. Today, you're much more protected than the average Trump supporter in the public square, in the sort of activism you can engage in, but I don't think that should be the case. And I think conservatives need to get a little bit tougher in the way that we write the law and enforce the law, in the way we engage in politics. I'm extremely excited to tell you that our backstage in October is going to be staged a little bit differently. That last backstage, that one got pretty heated. It was me and Drew and Matt and Ben
a moral level, Joe Biden keeps saying that we went there to stop al-Qaeda and prevent this from becoming a terror haven. I've noticed a few terrorists in Kabul lately. I don't know about you guys, but I've noticed like a few, like the Haqqani network that's actually running security in Kabul, which is al-Qaeda, and ISIS, which is there, and the Taliban, who, like, last time we trusted the Taliban to stop terror, it ended with a couple of buildings falling down in New York, you may recall. So, like, on that level, it's just acid.
I would have to, I agree with most of what you said, but when it comes to the Afghan army, and this is really almost irrelevant to what happened today, because as you point out, I mean, this is just a total tactical failure in terms of getting people out. And I mean, the fact that we have our troops there facilitating the evacuation of just masses of Afghans, many of them citizens, and we don't know if they helped us or not. I mean, it's hard to believe that they're all interpreters or whatever. So there's just no plan in place, which is disgraceful and insane. But as far as the Afghan army goes, I mean, I understand the point that the air support was taken away. I mean, the Taliban didn't have any air support. What we're told anyway is that the Afghan troops outnumbered the Taliban by 3 to 1. They're supposedly at 300,000 strong versus less than 100,000. Now I can understand when they're training to have the air support, they don't have it, that's a huge disadvantage that they have to accommodate. But you would think that as a military defending your nation, you would try to accommodate it rather than just give up in 2 days, which is exactly what they seem to do. I don't think we could put all the blame on the Afghan army like Joe Biden wants to do, but to solve them with all the blame, I think is excessive.
The one thing the Afghans are good at is fighting, and I really don't think that this is a failure of the Afghan army. I think it's a failure. You have to remember the Taliban blend in with the people, they terrify the people. The warlords who the armies were hoping would fight for them in the villages immediately surrendered because the people are basically in the villages, the people are afraid of the Taliban. They will welcome them back. They're also fighting Pakistan. Pakistan's secret service, which is mostly Islamist, is backing them, as has been backing them for their help. I don't really believe, I've never seen the Afghani fighters give up on anything.
Well, if you talk to the people that have been over there in our military training, the Afghan army, almost everything I've heard from people that have been in that position, and I've heard, I'm sure we all have talked to you, they'll tell you that it's very difficult because, very often they're there sort of on a mercenary basis. If they don't get paid, they don't show up. There's a big problem with drugs, huge problem, and it just, talking to people that have been in the position of training, what I've been told is that a lot of the soldiers they're training just don't seem all that interested.
Radical religiously based guerrilla armies tend to do pretty well in organizations, against organizations that don't have a great hierarchical structure, for sure. No question about that. The question is whether they just sort of gave up and ran away. When you structure an entire military around a certain style of warfare and then you just remove that style of warfare and you say we're leaving,
I agree with this, but the second point is also very important, which is the one thing that they understand in cultures like this is power dynamics. And it's not short-term power dynamics, it's long-term power dynamics. People who I know who were there in 2015 when Barack Obama first gave his leaving speech said that almost to the day, within 24 hours, all of the green on blue, the friendly fire attacks started happening. Immediately, all the village elders in any rural part of Afghanistan stopped cooperating with the United States military. And when they would say, we've given you money, we've been fighting on your behalf for years, why now? You won't even talk to us, you won't take our money, you won't say anything. Some of the soldiers have started shooting at us. Why? And the Afghan answer was, because you're leaving. And when you are gone, it is only a matter of time before the long-term power dynamics of Iran on our border, of Pakistan on our border, there's no question once you're gone. And if you're not going to be the power center, the people who are going to be the power center are people who will chop our heads off and rape our daughters. It's like, you can't leave us in a position of a power vacuum that we cannot ourselves fill. The Afghan army, of course, it's not a westernized army. Of course, it's not a sophisticated army. Of course, it's not a tremendously lethal army apart from American close air support, American logistics, American intelligence, which is part of it. Of course, that's all true. Since it's true, since we're not talking about people who only kill combatants, since if you're an Afghan soldier fighting the Taliban and your village falls, you may be fine, but they're going to rape your daughters and kill your son. In that situation, you've left them very little given the realities of the society in which they live, you've given them very few
And
options.
the point that they're a mercenary force is fair enough, but it is part of the failure of listen, I'm not a big fan of the Afghan culture, but still, when we created a mercenary force, but the times they have to be loyal to us instead of loyal to them.
They also the tribal. There is no war.
Right, which brings us to the point I feel like there's places where we're all going to agree here too, and that is, number one, it's not the job of the United States to build democracies out of places that are not right for democracy. I think we're all on the same page there. And I think that if you are going to seek to build regime stability, that is a very, very long-term process. I mean, we currently have 26,000 troops in South Korea still, and where we pull our troops, they would immediately be, that country would immediately be under threat from North Korea and China sponsored. We still have some 34,000 troops, 32,000 troops in Japan. We still have some 10,000 troops in Italy, so that we can have air power over northern Africa. In fact, by the time we left Afghanistan, the number of troops that we had on the ground officially was 2,500. That ranked at number 9 in places on Earth where we had troops. So the question is, what exactly were we there for? And if the answer, which I think we all agree, was to kill terrorists and make sure this doesn't become another haven for terrorists, then the question becomes, so what was the dramatic urgency in pulling out, considering that we had been experiencing year on year fewer than 20 combat casualties and 0 since February of 2020?
Well, I think the question of why we were there, we all might agree on why we would like to be there, or why we what we wish the reasons were. But I don't think Americans were right. Because the argument that we were given in the early days of that war was we're going in there to kill Osama bin Laden and the people who are harboring terrorists that put them down. Then in 2005, at George Bush's second inaugural, the mission was redefined. That was the freedom speech, the word liberty or freedom or and the teammates and I think tyranny anywhere on Earth is an existential threat to the American homeland. This was a radical it was obviously because not only do we tolerate certain authoritarian regimes, we've actually installed many authoritarian regimes that have never threatened us with so much as an insulting look. This redefines the mission as building not only a Madisonian democracy in Afghanistan, but talk about a forever war. Now, he said, we will abolish tyranny on Earth, which so long as man's nature is fallen, I don't think is going to happen. So he redefined it. Then I think the American people got pretty sick of that in the years that followed. Barack Obama famously campaigned actually to beef up troops in Afghanistan and to take troops out of Iraq, to restart the war there. Then he wanted to pull the troops out there as well. Then the mission, Trump runs on pulling the troops home, which was popular in both parts of the time. Then Joe Biden obviously maintains that. Now we're told we have to stay there for the Afghan women who suffer a terrible plight. You know, the women suffer a terrible plight in Pakistan as well.
This is not fair. Saying that women suffer in other parts of the world is true enough. The women suffering today in Afghanistan are suffering specifically because of an action that we've taken. They're still in charge.
Other things to do, like raise their children, do their job, you have to be able to convince them that you're there for a reason. The first one in there, and then to turn to the people and say, how dare you abandon this mission?
So I
know what the mission was.
First of all, I agree with the political failures of our leadership class and of the media in redefining the mission. And again, I think we all mainly agree on the idea that we didn't go into Afghanistan to create a thriving democracy and originally protect women. That was a good byproduct of the fact that wherever the United States bootstraps, things tend to get better. But that wasn't the original mission. We didn't go in there because we were going to free women. We freed women as a consequence of going in there, right? So, and as Joe Biden correctly but oddly non-secular fashion pointed out, if the attack had been launched from Yemen, we wouldn't have been in Afghanistan. Of course not. The problem is whether or not the American people are properly informed about what the rest of life exists. Just because we create a vacuum does not mean that no one is going to fill it. Just because people in the United States and in our leadership class misunderstand what the mission is, does not mean when we remove troops. That's not the terror hotbed again. And China doesn't take advantage of that terror hotbed to grab, for example, all of the $85 billion in military technology we just left there, including high-tech crap, including drone technology there. a mind to discover this. All the terrorist groups on Earth look at this, and they think that we are weak. So regardless of how this was pitched, and this is my problem with how Afghan war has been pitched, I think, for the past several years, the first pitch that was wrong was, this is about a war for establishing democracy in Afghanistan. You're right. Then there was a second pitch, and it was equally stupid. And the pitch was, the war of 2017 is exactly the same as the war of 2010, which is a lie. It's not true. The United States has taken down its presence in Afghanistan for 6 days. Now it's about 10,000 by the time Trump was up, it's down to 2,500. And when people said this is an endless war, I said, what war? You have 2,500 stations of zero casualties. You were safer up until until Joe Biden took off. You were safer being a soldier in Afghanistan than you were being a cop in Chicago, and it wasn't particularly close. Okay, the notion that this was an endless war that had to end right now, it had to end right now, and if we don't end it right now, we're going to be putting thousands of troops back in, is a lie. It is untrue. We've been losing on average before the supposed wonderful deal that Trump made with the Taliban, which I opposed. And I was clear about this when Trump was in office. I was perfectly consistent on this. Before that deal, we were losing 10, 12 guys a year. That is horrible. Every soldier lost is terrible. That does not constitute a full-scale war. A full-scale war is what was happening at the beginning of the war. We were losing hundreds of guys per year, thousands of guys in some cases.
But I think you have to grant, I agree with your point on the losses and the difference in the nature of the war. But it would still be endless, and that is what the Americans...
So since you remove all of our troops from South Korea, is that an endless war?
Well,
guys in military Afghanistan.
I mean, there is an active civil war going on right now in Afghanistan while our troops were there. And as we learned today...
Interesting, the civil war in Afghanistan is between the people we went there to depose and the people who we've been supporting for
it's also between ISIS, right? As Joe Biden actually rightly said, the Taliban are bad guys, but right now they are our allies against ISIS in this particular battle that we have to deal with today. So all I'm saying is it's complicated. It's not just the Taliban versus the good guy Afghans and us. It's ISIS, it's other Islamic groups, it's unaffiliated group, right? So,
but our goal was not to. But our goal was to destroy all of those associated terror groups that you just mentioned. They do have a common interest against us. Now the Taliban have a common interest to a certain extent. To a certain extent. By the way, I'm still not convinced that the Taliban didn't let these guys through to bomb the entry point. I mean, even the head of CENTCOM said that today. He was asked directly, did the Taliban just let these people through? They were the ones screening everybody at the outpost.
But I think this is the bigger political problem here. So sure, you say, well, we have endless troop presence in Korea or
literally
Japan
everywhere
or wherever.
We have troops in dozens and dozens and dozens.
Sure, and I do think they're a bit different than Afghanistan, but I grant the point.
We have 900
entirely.
troops on the ground in Syria.
But I think this is, and I think the same people who want to pull out of Afghanistan want to pull out of Syria. My point is this: our founding fathers warned repeatedly against continual warfare. James Madison said, "There's no greater threat to liberty than continual warfare." Jefferson reiterates Washington, and many other founding fathers too. And you might say, well, things are different now than they were then. Fair enough. My point is this, and it's to the political point. The American people are looking at this war in Afghanistan. They're not seeing any particular reason to stay there. They're even looking at the argument that have to prevent another 9/11 and saying, yes, Saudi nationals were welcomed into Afghanistan. They then came to America, they came to Europe, they were welcomed onto airplanes with tools that were not even illegal to bring on airplanes at the time. Why do we have a Department of Homeland Security? Why can't we deal with these things without having an on-the-ground presence in Afghanistan? And all I'm saying is, whether that is true or not, they have the founding fathers on their side, so I think we need to answer that.
They don't. The founding fathers went and killed all the Barbary pirates.
No. Knowles is right about this part. The thing is, this was before the invention of the airplane. The world was a very different place. They were talking about a country that was protected by 2 oceans, and they really did. If you take
that's why I use the example of Barbary pirates.
But still, the Barbary pirates were a threat to our trade and our commerce. There is a tradition in America of isolationism, and as far as I'm concerned, I would be okay with either being an isolationist nation or being an imperial nation. What I can't stand is doing both. Yeah. I cannot stand the promises. I can't stand the changing motivations. I cannot stand an uninformed public, a public who doesn't know. Rightly, they do not know who we are. They do not know what kind of country we're supposed to be in the world. Personally, I think that empire is unavoidable, and I think the Chinese are about to prove this to us by taking Taiwan, and then we're going to have a much easier time defining who we are. But just remember that These wars were never paid for. When George W. Bush was asked by the leftist press, what sacrifices are you demanding of America? His answer was essentially, well, we don't have to sacrifice to pay for a war. Well, no, wars are expensive. We do have to pay for it. We never paid for this war in the same way we never pay for the kinds of things that the Democrats buy
never
or
pay for
home.
anything.
So we never pay for anything. So the question becomes, where are we going to put our treasure? And I think that's the argument. Democrats know, they know where they want to put our treasure. And we, on the Republican side, or the conservative side, are really confused about this. Having an argument about this, I think we have to settle before the next presidential election.
Just a couple of points here. First of all, on the this idea that Afghanistan turns into a hotbed of terror if we're not there. Well, I don't find that terribly persuasive, because the entire Middle East, much of Africa, I mean, there are many places that become hotbeds of terror, currently are. So are we supposed to invade and occupy all of those places? I would also say...
What are the... This argument of bad things happen everywhere, are we supposed to go invade and occupy those places, is revisionist. No one's making an argument here that we need to go invade Afghanistan and occupy it. We went to Afghanistan and we did occupy it. It's the equivalent of saying, I shouldn't have had sex with Maggie Johnson back in junior year, so therefore, now on my child's birthday, I'm going to walk away from my child and Maggie, whom I married, and the mortgage, which we took out together, because I've realized I never should have gone there. And when you say, hey, but no.
Didn't you marry Afghanistan?
You actually went there. You actually did something. There are consequences.
But that goes to my next point. And actually, that analogy, I think, is important, because I don't think marriage should make an undying commitment to a person and ultimately to God. I don't believe that the United States can make that kind of commitment to any foreign nation, or can. And in fact, if any government, if any politician tries to make that kind of commitment to another foreign nation, it's not legitimate, and there's no reason why it should be respected. I mean, you talk about...
Of course, a million people don't get killed in rape.
Well, but you talk about, well, we're in South Korea, we're in Japan
and Germany, and Italy.
Yeah, we're in all these places. Well, there's an obvious response to that is maybe we shouldn't be there either. I mean, it's their country, and the idea...
So can I take that for a second? I just want to ask you a question on that specific point. So, it's 1953. We signed since we're doing revisionist history now. It's 1953. We signed the armistice agreement off on the 49th parallel in Korea. And we say, now you're president of the United States. Is the answer, okay, we're done, out, we have no interest here?
Well, no,
that is how you lose Cold Wars.
Yeah, no, but it's not 1953. I'm talking about in the year 2021.
I know, and I'm talking about 2021. Do you sign an agreement to say the Taliban gets to take over this country and bring in exactly the same people who did 9/11, which is exactly what's happening right now?
Yeah, in 2021, I would take our troops out of Afghanistan. I would do it a lot different than Joe Biden did. I wouldn't shut
What strategic interest is served by pulling our troops
that's the question
from Afghanistan?
Well, first of all, it's not only a strategic interest.
But what is the strategic interest?
There's 2 points, okay? And this is a strategic point, I guess, as well. The idea that the United States of America should be perpetually holding nations, foreign nations, into existence, which cannot exist on their own without our help. I just reject that strategically, and I reject it philosophically. And I just don't think that should be our role, unless, as Drew says, we're going to embrace it and say, you know what, we are an empire, and this is what we do. We build empires, we take over, we're going to take over Afghanistan. It's ours now, it's our property. And if that's the argument, then okay, let's make that argument.
But our empire is a uniquely American empire. So West Germany would not have survived as a nation if America hadn't left its troops there. It would have fallen to the Soviet Union in minutes if the Americans had pulled out. We think that like Berlin is in West Germany, by the way. It's in East Germany, and we had, we were cut off from access. We flew the Berlin airlifts to keep that city free. And it's not just that if we had left the next day, if we had left 5 years later, if we had left 10 years later, if we had left 20 years later. Similarly, back to the South Korea example, it took, first of all, a world war to drive the Japanese empire out of South Korea, then a Korean war to keep the North and the Chinese and Russians from taking South Korea, 33,000 American dead just in that war, and then occupation by our troops, not in the old imperial sense, because we didn't run their government, just like we didn't in Afghanistan, but in this uniquely American way, where our troops provide the opportunity for that nation to form. We had to do that for 42 years before South Korea became a functioning democracy. And after they became a functioning democracy, We've continued to have our troops there for 35 more years,
So a question.
so that democracy could learn to thrive.
Do you think that it is America's duty to actually perpetually hold other countries into existence, to keep them in existence? Is that...
If we're the ones who broke the country, in the case of Afghanistan, whatever the political argument for why we went there, we went. Should we have stayed for a week and then left? That's a conversation that we can prescriptively apply some of those lessons to future problems that you can't retroactively.
Would you really say we broke Afghanistan? It wasn't exactly a thriving place when we got
It was
in.
not a thriving place, but the problems faced by the current... Listen, the median age in Afghanistan is like 18 years. We've been there 20. The people in especially urban Kabul, the people in these cities that are falling right now, they're not like the guys who were there when we went in. This isn't people who ever lived under the Taliban. This isn't people, this isn't women, hold on. This isn't women who ever wore burqas.
These arguments do not, the reason these arguments don't hold water is because they're all really about the Cold War. And the Cold War was in a fight between two empires.
My argument is about Afghanistan.
No,
I'm saying
wait a minute. But
we went into Afghanistan. No, we went into Afghanistan. We went into Afghanistan. Wherever you think we should have gone, we held it for 20 years. We held it for 20 years, and now in leaving, we are the cause of the terrible things that are happening.
I don't agree with this at all. I know it's like the place is a mess. It's going to be a mess unless we stay, and it was a mess before we got there. But the thing about
Yes, it was a mess before we got there, but
the thing about Germany, the thing about Italy, all of these places were places we occupied to keep the Soviets and the Chinese out.
Right.
And the thing is, no. What I'm saying is, we are about to enter a new Cold War. I think there's no question about it. We're already halfway in it. However. The Taliban never, and even Islam, never constituted the existential threat to our way of life that we basically sold it as having. And that's the key thing here. That's the key difference. And so in other words, if now...
You're going back 20 years and saying that the argument is wrong. I'm saying right now, today, as we speak, an actual thing is occurring.
I'm sorry, we do not have a responsibility to every country. Even if this thing we broke...
I didn't say we have a responsibility to every country. We have a responsibility to the country we are in and have occupied for the last. We have a responsibility to Puerto Rico. That doesn't mean that we also have a responsibility to Costa Rica. Puerto Rico is our protectorate.
Well, I mean, here's the real...
So hold on. So we're not responsible. This is a legitimate question. We're not responsible for what's happening right now?
Well, wait a minute. So much of what's happening, this is what's a little confusing about the conversation, so much of what's happening is a matter of this incredible, this is criminal incompetence we're talking about. This is not just like, I left my shirt at home, I forgot to bring my tie to work. This is an...
Because Biden's argument is it
of
had to happen like this.
Yeah,
Actually don't.
that's completely insane. Yeah.
So there are a few things that I think we're also conflating. One is the morality of the situation, whether we owe it to the people of Afghanistan to stay there forever because they're the people of Afghanistan and they came to rely upon us. And I think there's an argument to say that the answer is no, not we're still America, we have our own interests. Then there's the question that I actually want to ask, which is, why is it in our interest to turn this back over to the Taliban, have it be a terrorist hotbed, incentivize China to go and get all the rare earth minerals, incentivize China to invade Taiwan? And why is all of that worth it to take 2,500 troops out of a position where no one was dying? That's the thing nobody seems to be understanding.
I think
we're not talking about 100,000 troops there.
We're
not talking about tens of thousands. So Joe Biden's excuse for this is that if he didn't, then tomorrow there'd be a vast wall of Taliban fighters coming over that wall. There is zero evidence of this. None. Okay, we'd had a stasis situation in Afghanistan effectively since 2014. Pretty much nothing had changed. And what you're talking about, we talk about ending endless war. I think that's fundamental slogan because it does not count for this war. We stationed a baseline of 2,500 people there with zero casualties for a year and a half.
Is there any reason to think that would maintain, given that given Afghanistan is not South Korea?
It has maintained for the it's maintained for the last 6 to 7 years. I think that there is very little evidence that the Taliban were on the verge of radically overrunning the country. I've yet to see Joe Biden present any of that intelligence evidence.
Do you think if we stayed exactly as we were 10 years from now, do you think we've now gone 16 years without it?
I think what you would see is what we have typically seen in situations like this. When it gets a little hotter, we put in a few more troops. When it gets a little colder, we take out a lot more troops. I don't think there's a situation in Afghanistan where we're dumping another 100,000 troops in there because we've had forces on the ground constantly degrading the Taliban.
Because the Afghan army, at the cost of thousands and thousands of lives a year, we're going and killing the Taliban.
So my question again is not, you can go back to the fundamental principle. When we do things to people, I think also, but I think that, Drew, you mentioned the Cold War. The world is filled with threats on a consistent basis.
This is where you and I agree. This is where you and I
The
agree.
notion that the Defense Department exists mainly as a make-work program for people to sit on a base in Alabama is silly. Okay, this has become the Democratic talking point, which is that our soldiers should never be put in the line of combat in favor of American interests unless those interests are existential to the United States. This has never been the perspective of any nation that has been worth its salt.
Well, this is the part where you and I agree. I mean, this is the thing.
And what I'm saying is, it seems like a fairly cheap deal to me to have been stationing 2,500 troops in country, providing air support, close air support with some military contractors at the cost of like 0.5% of the United States budget every year to keep the Taliban from taking back over the country and re-bringing in Al-Qaeda and re-bringing in ISIS and turning, I mean, we spent, you know how much money we had to spend to get back into Iraq just to quell ISIS? And our numbers being unconventional.
This is all based on the assumption that the situation right now would maintain in this tribalistic hellhole country in the middle of a civil war between all these various different factions. I don't think, first of all, there's any reason to think that that's true. We're going through 6 to 7 years in the grand scheme of history is nothing at all. So we're going through a period of relative
20 years in the grand scheme of history is hardly anything at all.
Agreed. But
I'm gonna start working out
they're going
tomorrow,
through a
too.
period of relative calm
Maybe
as a result of
tonight.
that in Afghanistan. I don't think there's any reason to think that it would maintain that way. And there was always this threat when you send our guys over to Afghanistan. They're still at least at a serious threat of being killed in service to this
I want to get food.
rel-
No, they really were not. They really were not. You have 2,500 troops there and 0 combat deaths since February 2020.
Well, but that,
And
that
7 years prior.
But I'm saying that could change at any moment. There's no reason to think that could
That's
change
true,
at any moment.
Matt. That's true. That's true. Literally anywhere on Earth. That's true. Literally anywhere on Earth.
No.
Tomorrow, yes, it is. Tomorrow.
It's not. Yeah, it's not true. Japan. I mean, Japan. I think.
If China decides to get militaristic with Japan and they have fired some missiles into the Sea of Japan, you could get militaristic pretty there. Everyone knows in South Korea is the biggest hotspot. Right? They've got 26,000 troops there. And
So you would agree that Japan is running
right. And the volatility is the reason. The volatility is the reason you have. When we invaded Afghanistan, we had these strong Russian era maps. We had no intelligence. We knew nothing about Afghanistan. We knew very little about Pakistan. We had very little eyes into Iran. Pakistan, by the way, a nuclear power with 75 nuclear weapons, who already their intelligence service for this whole time has been sympathetic to the Taliban, and now they have ejected all Americans since Biden's withdrawal in the last 2 weeks.
Are you guys making two different arguments? Because you're saying on one hand we should stay there because it's peaceful and nobody's dying, on the other hand we should stay there because it's volatile. So
I'm saying that America's
keeping a lid on it, and we were keeping a lid on it.
Yeah,
Now you
right.
remove the lid, and now you get a good job.
And it's in America's strategic interest to
Not have a future there.
not have it.
But this goes back to a political failure, and it's a political failure. You can't say we're going in there to get Bin Laden. I mean, it's still a conversation. We've got some sort. You can't say we're going in there to get Bin Laden. Oh no, we're going in there to build a civilized country. Oh no, we're going in there because we need Bagram in order to fight the Chinese interest. No, you can't do that and succeed unless we understand ourselves to be in a conflict of great power. And this is broken, you fix it ever again. I want to be when my fellow Americans send their sons and daughters into harm's way. I want to know that they are there in this country, and for our interest, and part of our interest. I wish most of our major corporations knew this.
I will
but
say,
still.
you better have a damn compelling reason for pulling out 2,500 from a place where they're the lid and they're the cork in the bottle, especially when that is now going to subject 19 million women to rape. You better have a very good reason. It better not be a slogan like "No endless war."
I don't
That is not good.
You guys keep saying these things, slogans. All of Democratic politics are slogans. I mean,
Don't be a deconstructionist.
no, I'm not being a deconstructionist. I'm talking about the reality of political.
Why do I have a question. When does it become about whether, just because the American people like a thing does not mean that they are correct to like the thing.
But
The American people like Cardi B, she's
to
terrible.
set their nation's course, doesn't it? I mean, I think they still. I know that, especially for recent decades, there is this idea that
On foreign policy, they 100% do not. What's the last congressionally approved war?
they do.
What's the last congressionally approved war?
well, this wasn't. I mean, that's the other problem. Was this a war? Was this an occupation?
I understand. Michael, if we're talking about the reality of the ground, when was the last time the Americans approved it?
But this gets very important. I actually think here was very important, which is when you said, yes, America's empire is special. And I jokingly said, yeah, it's special because we don't admit that we're an empire. And the reason that we don't admit it, by the way, is because our nation is founded not to be an empire. All of our most founding fathers said, don't do this, don't have perpetual war, don't have entangling alliances, don't go over.
And then they put this records from one place all the way across to the other coast, all the way down to
fighting the whole way.
But they didn't occupy it as some imperial territory. They would bring it into the nation.
Wait, hold up.
They would annex
an imperial territory.
No,
Literal federal territory.
Are we going to make Afghanistan a state? I don't think.
If you go to the
Make Afghanistan a state,
but then I'm making it a state.
Hold on. You're talking about
empire and
so wait. You're saying that it's not imperialistic. You're saying it's less imperialistic to make it a state.
Yes, by definition.
Then to
the nation. Yeah, because it's part of the nation. But if you hold it as
take place over any that's ridiculous. I'm sorry, it's ridiculous.
The British Empire. Hold on, the British Empire turned us into British citizens.
But they didn't occupy it as some imperial territory. They would bring it into the nation.
Wait, hold up.
They would
annex as an imperial territory.
No,
All
they
these
would
places
annex
were
it
literally
into the
federal
nation.
territories until they became states.
Until they became states. Are we going to make Afghanistan a state? I don't think.
If you go to the
making Afghanistan a state,
but then I'm making it a state.
Hold on.
Between
You're talking about
empire and
so
the nation.
wait. So you're saying that it is not imperialistic. You're saying it's less imperialistic to make a thing a state.
Yes, by definition, because it becomes a nation. Yeah, because it's part of the nation. But if you hold it as
take place over any that's ridiculous. I'm sorry, it's ridiculous.
The British Empire. Hold on, the British Empire turned us into British citizens.
If you go to the World War II memorial in Washington D.C., it says we came to liberate, not to conquer, and that's been basically our idea with all.
That's why our troops have been there for 7 years.
With everywhere else. Well, okay, then what Knowles is saying is right. That the problem with our empire is we don't admit it's an empire. Now Ferguson makes this argument all the time, and I think he's got a point. And I think if you don't make the argument, if you don't tell the truth, the American people who still do go to war, the President of the United States, who still is the guy who runs most of our foreign policy, are not going to be convinced, and you can't accuse them of bumper sticker slogans when you're basically selling them
pretty much everything else politically.
You're basically selling them a bumper sticker slogan themselves.
I still think just we're operating with this assumption that because the situation was a certain way, it's going to maintain that way, and that denies the risk that our military was in over there. I know that it's been a certain way for a few years, but I don't think we can do that. I don't think it's fair to do, because part of this is we're sending, our sons and daughters are actually going over there. And there's many of them have died in the last few years, not as many, but there's always that threat of something terrible happening to them, as we've just discovered. And on top of that as well, there are other things too that we haven't brought up. Like one of them, again, talking to the veterans that served over there, even in the peacetime, they'll talk about things like, I don't know, they come home traumatized because they have to overlook child rape, which is utterly widespread in the Afghan army and in the Afghan leadership. And they're just over there and they have to just deal with it. And they're told, and not to mention the threat of being killed by our supposed allies, but even that alone, just that piece alone, to me means send our guys home. Because I'm not, they got to go over there and look the other way while children are raped left and right. And it was as widespread as that.
Wait, hold on. Are you going to be a realist or are you going to be a moralist here? I'm going to need one or the other.
Well, you're answering the moralism with the sort of moralistic argument on the other.
It's not a moral answer, though, to say X people do bad things, therefore let's create a vacuum in which people who didn't do those things suffer horrible moral consequences.
No, I'm trying to bring it back around to focusing on the actual human beings, our countrymen and our service members who we are sending into these situations. So when we say that there hasn't been a combat death in 6 or 7 years, I think that overlooks.
In 18 months.
In 18 months, right.
And few for relatively.
There has been relatively few for 6 or 7 years. When we say that overlooks some realities that they were living with, that I think we have to at least contend with if we're going to have this conversation.
Putting the military in place is always a question of cost versus benefit. And so you're lining up the cost, and I'm saying that there were actual benefits. And I think one of the things that's happened here is that what has happened in the wake of the United States pulling out is being labeled a potential cost to the United States when it is an actual cost to the United States. Meaning that what Joe Biden has done is in the aftermath of pulling out, and as they bomb American troops, and as Taliban takes over the country again, and as ISIS comes back in, and as Al-Qaeda comes back in, my argument is pretty simple. If we hadn't left, this wouldn't have happened. And my evidence for this is that if we hadn't have left, this wouldn't have happened. Joe Biden's argument is, if we had stayed, this would have happened. He's going to have to prove that case stronger than I think this would have happened, because the counterfactual is already here. It's happening. It's happened. The Taliban have taken over the country. So I already know that if A, then B. He's saying, if not A, then B. That doesn't exist. As an alternative history, the last data point that I had is that it wasn't happening. So unless he can show, which he has not done, extremely compelling data that beating 2,500 place is going to result in this straw man argument. We have 50,000 troops back in there fighting close hand-to-hand combat in Mazar-e Sharif. I'm going to need some actual evidence of that, not some bullshit from Joe Biden to justify the fact that he wanted to pull out in 2010 and can't get his hat out of his ass.
This is also why I don't want any more selfless wars. I don't want any more selfless wars. Okay, you can prescriptively take that wisdom into the future. This wasn't a selfless war. It is a
self-anonymity now going in.
It is a selfish withdrawal. We actually we don't bear. America's not responsible for every humanitarian crisis in the world. We're just responsible for the ones that we create. We are creating this crisis. If we had gone in, tried to kill bin Laden and left, we did dare strikes and left. I don't buy the Colin Powell, if you break it, we bought it. But if you break it, create it, hold it, let a generation of people come of age under American protection, and then just decide on a whim for no strategic upside that you're just going to bail on them and leave them all to slaughter.
Leaving out that last part about no strategic upside just for a minute. I think that argument is basically saying we have to throw good money after bad. If we go into a place and we have a American interest and we cannot serve that American interest, we withdraw because we can't serve that American interest, and and the country reverts to what it was before we got there. I'm not sure I can hold us responsible for that.
We're responsible for the 2 million people who died in Southeast Asia after we abandoned the South Vietnamese. Of course we bear responsibility. We are not wholly responsible. We bear responsibility.
That's the context. The question is, are the people who are pushing defund the police responsible for an increase in crime? To my mind, yeah. Okay, well, this is the exact same thing internationally. If you remove the cops, well, then people go around killing other people.
Yeah, but that assumes that we're the cops.
The world police.
But we are the cops. We went over and took over that.
We were in the position.
In fact, we didn't just take over that country.
By the way,
we created that.
By the way, you can make the case. You can make the case that if you had to redeploy the people, to take the domestic context. If you had the police in one area, right, when you had to make the decision, we need to redeploy the police from here to here because it's more important to have them over here. Or the cost that we are undergoing in this city, for the police, too many cops are dying. We're removing them and we're putting them here. You're still responsible for what comes next over here because you removed the police. But at least you can say the costs here will work the benefits here. The point that we're having in Afghanistan right now is that the costs here are accruing not only no benefit, but negative benefit.
So I think the question that is coming up is what changed? Not only what changed in the last 20 years, but what changed since 1950? What changed since our establishment of sort of empire overseas? And I think we should define the terms because we're using different terms for imperialism and nationalism. When I say that Texas, the acquisition of Texas is not imperialism. Of course, it's imperialism when you go and you...
And Lincoln thought it was imperialism.
But when you make it part of the nation, that is a very different thing, or even Hawaii, for that matter, making it part of the nation, that is a very different thing than the British nation. The point, well, I'll show you the distinction. When Great Britain holds India as an imperial territory, it is not holding it as a part of the British nation. It is recognizing this is a distinct culture, a distinct country, its own thing, but we are holding it. We are the British Empire. We don't really do that with Texas, as distinct as Texas is. We say it's all part of the American nation. Now, we hold imperial territories, like Puerto Rico. We've held other imperial territories that because of our national origin, we gave up, and we have always felt uncomfortable with in the 19th and 20th century. But this brings us then to the question, what changed between 1950 and today? And the question, and it gets back to your point, Drew, and it gets to your point also, which is, we in the middle of the 20th century were a strong superpower with a lot of national cohesion that knew who we were. We knew what it meant to send truth, justice, and the American way overseas. We can't even put that in Superman movies anymore. They actually cut that line out. To your point, man, you say, what are we there for? Are we going to raise the pride flag on the embassy in Kabul, which we actually did. I don't think a lot of Americans are going to get behind that. That has become a sort of imperial flag, but a lot of people don't support it. So I think it's very important, if you want to choose, are we just a nation, or are we just an empire, or is it inevitable to become an empire, which I think probably it is for Britain. What is the empire? What is it? And I just think if you're in a situation where you can't agree on anything, in this country you can't even agree on the definition of man and woman at this point. You've got major political activists with the support of the Democratic Party burning down the country in 2020. I'm just not sure that you have the ability to projected it. I'm not sure what we're projecting.
This I think is an enormous strategic and ideological mistake. If the notion is that the weaknesses and internal failures of the United States do not allow us to either pursue a strategic interest overseas or to say to the Taliban, sorry, whatever it is that we are pursuing is better than what you are pursuing, then I think that there are failures on the right as well. I'm not a fan of the right process.
I want to make this one point. I'm not making even a prescriptive argument here.
It's a descriptive argument.
And the descriptive argument is this. 70% of Americans want it out of Afghanistan, and the majority of Americans, both parties, have wanted out for a long time. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying I think the reason for that is the collapse of our cohesion, and we had a lot more of it.
I don't think that, listen, you don't have to argue to me about the lack of cohesion and the moral decline of the United States, right? I think that as a nation, one of the symptoms that we are so eager to get out of Afghanistan, I think that is a symptom of the fact that we are a nation that is ready to climb into a warm bath, get fat, and slit our wrists. I think that is I think that is where we are as a country. I think that's why Joe Biden is president right now, because he's effectively a senile president presiding over a nation in a tragic state of decay. I think that seems like what it is unless there's some sort of dramatic resurgence. With that said, I think that what happened in American foreign policy is pretty obvious. We had a mission when the Soviet Union was around because we recognized there were existential threats to the United States in the form of the Soviet Union. Then the Soviet Union fell, and we figured we have no idea what the hell we're doing. Right? Are we doing this for capitalism? Are we doing this for liberalism? Are we doing this for nothing? Should we do Pat Buchanan retrenchment? Should we instead try and spread the message of the IMF? Like, what exactly are we doing here? And what we failed to recognize is that, once again, nature and foreign policy abhor a vacuum. And the notion that the United States was forever and always, that we'd reached the Francis Fukuyama end of history, which of course is slightly misinterpreted, but that we had reached that end of history where the United States was destined to be the everlasting hegemon, created this sense of, so what do we do with all this stuff? What do we do with all this power? And what that failed to recognize is that there are always powers on the move. And that is what you're seeing in Afghanistan right now. And the fact is that when we leave, it's not as though everything just goes back to a tribal state of warfare with no externality. By the way, the Taliban was in charge for a grand total of 5 years in Afghanistan. Everybody acts like the Taliban was in charge since forever. They were in a state of constant civil war with serious externalities, for particularly the Soviets and for surrounding republics, for quite a long time. And the United States was deeply involved in Afghanistan all the way back in the 50s, right? Eisenhower actually flew into Kabul airport in 1959. So the United States has always been involved all over the world. The question is always one of costs and benefits, which I keep coming back to this because I think that's a hard-headed way of doing foreign policy. And so I ask, again, I don't see the benefit in pulling out other than the fulfillment of this muddle-headed idea that we have somehow sinned in being in Afghanistan or to continuing sin to remain in Afghanistan at extraordinarily low cost to keep a lid on what was going on there, and especially in the face of Chinese aggression. The notion in American foreign policy continued. We were able to keep an empire, effectively, during the Cold War because we were doing so as an anti-communist empire. Not because we were doing so as an American empire, but because we were able to do all this stuff saying we were opposing the Soviets, right? And the reality is, nature's going to force us back into that. You can say we're out of Afghanistan. Not for long, we ain't.
That's right. Yeah. We were out of Iraq, and then we were back there.
What you just said is far more in keeping with my tragic view of these things than anything else that anybody's talking about. But in the interim, during this end of history phase, we did fall apart. And Knowles is right about this. It's very hard to project power without. It's very hard to project the kind of power that is American power without an American set of values. We no longer have an American set of values, and I think, listen, it's a truly tragic thing that it is China that is about to force us back into the great game. But in forcing us back into the great game, it will help us redefine who we are. Because it's not true that everything we did against the Soviets was simply against the Soviets. We were against the Soviets because they stood for something that we didn't stand for.
I agree.
It was only in my horrific first generation that we lost the plot of what we stood for against the Soviets.
So I agree with everything you
and by the way, just one more thing. Vietnam gets a bad rap. In some ways it deserves a bad rap. But the Chinese looked at us in Vietnam and thought, those people are crazy. And it kept them in line for 50 years. And they didn't really start to stretch out their imperial tentacles because they saw we were going to fight them on every level, and they just didn't want any part of it.
Yeah. So I agree with what you just said. I agree with what you just said. The reason to remain in Afghanistan is America's strategic interest. I do think that we're abstracting our way out of the urgent moral question. There is a moral question about whether or not, in addition to pursuing our strategic interests, we also create moral obligation along the way. I agree that you don't have a moral obligation to go into every place that something bad happens. I agree that you don't have a moral obligation to occupy every country that you drop some bombs on or send special operators into. I agree that you don't have a moral responsibility to build governments in countries even if you do occupy them for a brief amount of time. Those are philosophical, political questions. They are abstract questions. They're questions that can deeply inform our view of the world. They can deeply inform the actions that we will take in the future. The urgent question today, the moral question today, is do we have an obligation to the people who for 20 years lived under whatever drove us there, whatever took us there, whatever mistakes we made along the way, whatever things we should or shouldn't have done, whichever things we hope to do in the future or hope not to do in the future. We did do something in Afghanistan. And because of what we did for the last 20 years, we keep using the word women, the people being raped and murdered are women. They're not women, they're small girls. They're 13, girls. Girls who were going to school, girls who were not wearing burqas, girls who were not Westerners. They did not have our values, but they had something far better than the values of the generation that preceded them in Afghanistan. And they had them as the direct result of actions that we ourselves took. So while we are, I believe, betraying our strategic interests, I think we're emboldening China. I think we're emboldening Russia. I think we're going to see the fall of Pakistan to the Taliban, and now the Taliban will be one of the 6 nuclear powers on the earth. I think we're emboldening Iran. I think we're emboldening ISIS and Al-Qaeda, just like when we pulled our troops wrongly out of Iraq under Barack Obama, and suddenly we lost half the country that we had fought to win, and we lost Syria, and ISIS formed, and Europeans started getting bombed and getting their heads chopped off, and now we had to fight yet another war in Iraq, and yet another war in Syria. I think we're going to see the same thing. For all the reasons I think it's horrible for the interests of the United States of America to withdraw our troops, I also think there is a moral question about our withdrawal of our troops.
Let me address that one moral question, which is, in order to answer that moral question, you have to imagine the counterfactual that Joe Biden did not screw this up beyond the imagination of man. You have to be able to say that there was an orderly withdrawal. We left the place intact, we left the government intact, we left the army intact, and we withdrew slowly in an orderly manner. We got our people out, we got our allies out. All of those things you have to imagine first, right? Because the moral thing that's happening is happening because of this incredible act, almost mind-boggling act of incompetence.
And I suppose what I would say to
in that case, if we left Afghanistan in an orderly manner, Afghanistan still could not maintain its government, still could not maintain its system, then I would say no, we don't actually have an obligation.
And I suppose what I would answer to that is we had essentially withdrawn from Afghanistan. We had the lightest touch. We were using the lightest touch.
But now you're changing the question. I mean, the question is, do we have an eternal moral obligation? And no, eventually another country, unless we're an empire, eventually other countries have to be able to pull out of the Philippines.
I don't think it's unreasonable if we had any moral obligation to the people of Afghanistan, and frankly, I don't think we did or do. But if we did, then I think 20 years is a pretty good amount of time to give them to figure out how to run their own country. And honestly, we all agree that the way that we pulled out was terrible and incompetent and all that. But no matter how we pulled out, I just think you are the military of Afghanistan. This is your job. You should be able to do this, no matter how America leaves. And if they can't, then I think the moral failures fall on the Afghan army. More so than on the American
I think
army.
you think that 20 years. You think 20 years means 20 years was enough.
I don't know. What do you want?
Like the longer you're there, the more you need to leave. And I think what I'm suggesting is the longer you're there, the more responsibilities you begin to incur.
Sure, roast chicken and
if you go into a country and bomb them and get out, if it's shock and awe and leave. If you shoot some cruise missiles into the Sudan, you have very little obligation to the Sudan, for the people of the Sudan that you incur as a result. If you were there for a year until Tora Bora, we realized that bin Laden's probably out of Afghanistan and we're going to have to take our fight elsewhere, you've incurred more moral obligation, but certainly far, far less than if you've been. We have been there, and we have engaged in nation building.
If you withdraw your support for a tyrant like the Shah of Iran, and another tyrant, an Islamist tyrant, comes in and takes over, like the Ayatollah Khomeini, essentially, do you have an obligation there? Do you think like, oh, gee, we should have kept supporting the Shah?
Well, certainly 100% we should have kept supporting.
Yes, for political reasons. For political reasons, but not for moral.
But I think that even when it comes to foreign policy, morality is a currency. Right, I mean, that is just a reality of the situation, right? This is why the United States ought to win the Cold War, for example. Morality is a currency. And one of the ways that morality is used as a currency is via incentivizing people to join your fight. Meaning that
I actually don't understand
let me
what you're
explain.
saying. Yeah.
So in Afghanistan, it is not merely that we went there and out of the kindness of our heart, we were like, here's some liberalism, and we're here to save you, and all. We went in there with a particular purpose, as we all discussed, the explanation of that purpose, all that's true. We then made a bunch of promises to all the people who work with us. Hundreds of thousands of people who work with us. That if you work with us, you will have these things. Your women will be able to go to school. Your women will be able to walk out in the streets. And women help us. Many women help us. Right? You will be able to live a different life. And they lived that life. And many of them kept those obligations. And so now the question becomes, if you make a promise, and then you withdraw the promise, is that a problem? And I think the answer is yes. And then the question becomes, okay, so how do we deal with that promise? So for example, if we were talking right now, because these are now the alternatives. Now we're to the real world alternatives. Right? The alternative number one, we pull out of the country. We made promises to literally hundreds of thousands of people that Joe Biden says this all the time, that we were going to help them get out, not to the United States, but someplace else. Right? That if we leave and if this thing collapses, you're going to get out. And by the way, we did the same with the Vietnamese boat people. We should have in the aftermath. Many of those people are unbelievably good American citizens. We do this for people who are trying to escape Cuba from a bad life to a good life. You know, if the alternatives are figure out where 250,000 people who actively work with the United States are going to live, or keep a baseline troop presence there and nobody has to leave. Which one of those is better? Now, again, I think that you can. In the end, everything in foreign policy, just like in politics generally, comes down to transactional cost. Yeah. It comes down to cost and benefit. When you're making a calculation as to the promises that you made to people on a moral level, do we bear any responsibility for those people? So, for example, forget about keeping the troops there. Do we bear any responsibility to the people we made promises to? We were going to evacuate them to help them evacuate, or should we have just said, you know what? Screw it. We helped you for 20 years. You're on your own. The Taliban slaughtered you.
We all agree that we had responsibility to the people we promised to evacuate.
Right.
If our government made those, right. And they did.
Okay, so we agree on that. So then the question is just whether, with regard to the keeping of the skeleton force, whether that would have been better, or is it better to try and airlift out hundreds of thousands of people, hundreds more thousands, by the way, are still going to get left in the skeleton. And we own a moral obligation to not just the girls who are about to get raped, but to their fathers who worked with us, and to their parents who worked with us. And I think the answer is yes. When you incur a mutual obligation in order to get a thing done, you owe something.
Do you think that's an everlasting moral obligation, I guess is the question.
I mean, I think that it is a moral obligation that if you promise someone, we didn't promise the people who fought with us that, here's the deal. You fight with us today, in 20 years we're out. Right? And if the Taliban take over, that's it. We'll fight with you today, in 20 years we're gone. That's not and that's not how you promise in foreign policy. No one promises that way in foreign policy, because then nobody does it.
So we promised we'd be there forever?
No, we promised that they were going to have a particular kind of life. This is what happened.
Which would entail us to be there forever?
Not necessarily.
Or we fly them
Not necessarily, or we fly them over here, or maybe there's the possibility that if we withdraw in more orderly fashion and don't completely collapse their air force from within. Okay, but
did the Afghan government and military have any obligation of its own to its own citizens?
Of course they had an obligation of its own. And by the way, they undertook that obligation to the tune of 50,000 dead over the course of the last 6 years.
And 67,000 dead in the 20 years we've been.
Right, I mean,
and that's
an awful lot of human beings.
That is an awful lot, but that's also...
That's more American troops than we've lost in all wars combined since Vietnam.
But that's the way the ratio should be, at least. I mean, they are defending their own country. They should take the lion's share of the casualties.
So I agree with you.
So the idea that we're supposed to, admire the Afghan military for being the ones to take the brunt of the casualties. Of course, it's your country. I mean, who else is going to do it?
Right, but my question is, I suppose I just don't understand the tremendous urgency that was felt by so many people who must get this tiny, bare-bones force out of Afghanistan forcefully. And the consequences are world historical. And they are. Okay, when you turn over a country of 38 million people to the Taliban, welcome in all these terrorist groups, give China an open running field, give Russia an open running field, and then, yes, create the moral hazard. And this does make a difference in the world. When our allies look at us, and yes, this goes back to the political leadership point, maybe we should never talk in moral terms. But I do happen to think that it was kind of a good thing that we stopped mass rape in Afghanistan. So George W. Bush said in a couple of speeches, we stopped terrorism, and by the way, we also stopped the mass rape of 12-year-old girls in Afghanistan. I don't think that's the end of the world. But if people in the
world... We're looking the other way on the rape of boys.
I mean, so he should have said that too. And he should have moved on that. Okay, like we can all agree, I'm not in favor of the rape of boys. I think we're all on the same page.
But there's the painting of the Afghan allies, and I'm very grateful for the allies who helped us, but there's the painting of them as these pure as the driven snow, charitable people who didn't commit. But what Matt is saying is they committed some of the same atrocities that we're all focusing on.
The
here.
South Koreans did too during that 42 years that we occupied South Korea.
And so did the South Vietnamese, and so did Pinochet, and so did, that's the nature of foreign policy. The question is it more moral? What was the United States president? Did we make Afghanistan in the period of our dominance better than it had been under the Taliban?
Sure, but if we're now having the moral discussion, then I think it's important to remember that when we went in there, the people who helped us in Afghanistan, I don't think they did so on the suggestion that we were going to stay there forever and fight as imperial territory. That was not the argument we made when we went in. And I don't. I'm sorry.
Who claimed it as an imperial territory?
Well, I think we are saying now we should have stayed there for many, many more years.
I don't think that makes it an imperial territory.
Yeah,
it does.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think it does, but we'll get back.
But Germany's
I think you guys are both. I think both of you are wrong about that.
Well, what would you say if China tried to build a base? What if some kind of other country tried to build one military base? In our country, we would say you're trying to claim us as your own, right?
And I just to get back to this moral point.
So isn't it the same thing if we do that in another country?
But just on this moral point, Ben brought up transaction, and foreign policy is decided by transaction. And I just think that it's worth remembering. I'm grateful for the support of our Afghan allies. They were doing so because they had an interest, and I actually don't believe that they thought the United States was going to stay there forever. I don't think we said we were going to stay there forever.
I think when you look at,
they thought we were the best.
I think when you look at America's history in the last century, any place where we fought and won, we still had troops.
Before 1975.
Anywhere, I'm sorry, in the last.
No, but I mean, I just think
until 19. Any place that we fought and won, we still had troops. Every place that we fought and suffered humiliating defeat, we don't still have.
If I can just interject one more time, more tragic truth like one thing we should also keep in mind that the thing that we're actually noticing is that a democracy is a very bad system for running an empire. And the reason it's a bad system for running an empire is because one day you've got George W. Bush running the place, and the next day you've got Joe Biden or Obama running the place, don't agree, and they pull out our troops, and they put our troops back in, and our promises are broken. And our promises are broken for democratic reasons, because we voted for somebody who's going to break the promise of the last guy we voted for. This is one of the reasons that as free nations become strong, and free nations become strong, they become empires, and they stop being free nations. And this is one of the prices I believe we're going to have to pay. There's a reason the Roman Republic fell. There's a reason this republic will fall. And I think that we have to understand that what you guys are talking about, keeping your promises, is going to be a drain on the democratic process.
I'm also curious what
foreign policy has been. I mean, I'm going to point out that every president since Barack Obama pledged to get the troops out, and nobody did it. Because it turns out that foreign policy is not a democratic process.
Not at the moment.
It's not.
It's not, but it is, you know.
It has not been since World War II. Joe Biden did not get out because the people of the United States were rabidly demanding that Joe Biden get out. If you looked at the list of American priorities, getting out of Afghanistan.
But they voted for somebody who was going to get us out.
Okay, but now you're actually justifying the idea that they voted for somebody who pledged he was going to go to universal health care. I mean, like that doesn't work. That's not right.
No, it isn't. But it's true. It's not. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying
and
it's
George
true.
W. Bush was right in 2005 when he said he voted for a guy who's going to privatize Social Security. Except that's not the way this works. Okay, just because you vote for a president of the United States and because that president wins does not mean that he has a referendum on every single issue down the line, or that his calculations.
I'm talking about the reality of it. I'm not arguing the morality. I'm talking about the reality of it, and this is one of the reasons.
Yes,
why great nations lose their republic.
Elections have consequences. This is true. Of course. It is also true that the American people have a piss poor understanding of foreign policy because our leadership class is garbage when it comes to this stuff. And it has been since the Cold War. And during half the Cold War, we had a piss poor
America's leaders have been piss poor on foreign policy way before the Cold War.
Yeah.
piss poor on everything also, but I am curious what you guys say about this issue on the moral question of our now, when we talk about exerting our influence, and we think about what that influence actually is. Now, I think about one of the most powerful videos that I've seen recently was, it was a small group, but still, it was in Jamaica, and I don't know if everyone's seen this video, but our embassy in Jamaica was flying a pride flag. And the Jamaican people got together and protested and said, we don't want that here. That's your values. It's not ours. We don't want it here. And I look at that and I side against our embassy. I'm on their side 100%. And so and I don't like that. I mean, when someone's protesting our embassy and I have to be on the side of the protest,
it's not a good place to be.
It's not a good place to be. It's also tragic and sad that I have to say that.
Why are we flying the flag?
Right. So what about that problem as well? I'm just curious what you guys Think
I
about
mean,
that. The
I don't
fact that-
disagree with any of that. I do think that it is better for that. I think that if the package deal, and I wish there weren't a package deal. I wish we weren't flying the pride flag. I think it's absurd to fly anything but the American flag, period, at a United States embassy. The American flag is now more controversial in the United States than the Pride Progress flag.
Much more so.
Significantly more so.
Because the Pride Progress flag is, in my view, my humble view, the imperial flag, right? It's universal, and we put it at our embassies all over the world.
So but putting aside so then the question is, okay, so here's the package deal. I disagree with flying the Pride Progress flag in Kabul. I definitely agree with preventing the mass rape of 18 million women. So if I have to balance those out, that's not that tough a balance. America may suck in a lot of ways, but we don't suck in that big giant ways. And so I have generalized moral objections to the conflation of America again, and you see this a lot actually with the kind of left-wing approach to the United States. We can't criticize this country over here because look at all the problems we're having over here. And I do see it mirrored sometimes on the right, which is look at all the bad stuff we're pushing over here, the gender ideology and critical race theory. And that makes it inappropriate for us to, quote-unquote, spread our values anywhere else. And all I would say is, yes, those values should not be spread even at home. But it's a fallacy to say that because there are people in the United States spreading that at home, it is therefore bad for other countries for us to export the parts where we kill the guys who are the rapists.
The pride flag here is just sort of symbolic in a lot of ways, but it represents the overall problem. Obviously, if you're going to weigh the rape of thousands of girls against the pride flag in our embassy, the rape of thousands of girls is obviously a lot more clear. But what we are exporting in general, and the pride flag is utter total moral confusion. And I do think that people in Jamaica and across the world see that, and what they're saying is, we don't want any part of that. We don't want that here. You guys are,
this is what
are falling apart morally.
The leader of France.
On a broad scale, I mean, we weren't flying the Pride Progress flag in 2005, and the Taliban didn't seem to waver in their determination to overthrow the.
Michael, what were you about to say?
Macron, the leader of France, came out. This was about a month or so ago, and he addressed woke ideology. He had, political correctness, whatever you want to call it. He said, this is bad stuff. We don't have that here. This is France. This is one of the most liberal nations on earth. We don't have that here. It is a poison. We are going to prevent it from coming into our schools and our institutions. And I think that's kind of what Matt is getting at here. Yes, we historically have exported wonderful things and ideas and values around the world. That is changing. That has changed. And even Western enlightened, wonderful leaders are recognizing that. And I think that causes some of the lack of cohesion at home.
It has absolutely changed. Our values today, in many ways, are worse. Some of our values are a lot better, though. And I think one of the mistakes that we make on the right, because we're definitionally reactionary, that's what the right is that because we point at all the bad things that are beginning to happen, we wind up. And even Donald Trump did this, when he basically said, "Oh, we do bad things too. The Russians do bad things. We do bad things." That's a horrible line, because it is 90% true and 100% wrong, right? Yes, we do. Of course, it's true that we do bad things. There is no comparison. America is we still live in a great time. We still have, fundamentally, compared to most people in most places at most times, a great way of life, a great value system, a better value system in some ways than we've ever had, a worse value system in some very important ways, and a worsening value system in some very particular ways that we need to fight. But when you see little Nikki Fuentes, saying on the only social channels he's still welcome on, of course he should not be banned.
Well, this actually,
I still also like to rub a little salt. But he said, Afghanistan is falling to a regime that makes women cover their faces, and some little clever little list of, I made you think, because really America is just as bad. And you go, no, America isn't just as bad. The fact that America has gay marriage does not make it as bad as the Taliban.
But I suppose
the fact that America has transgenderism confusion, which is a horrible moral sin that needs to be combated, doesn't make us as bad as Afghanistan. Honestly, even the fact that America has abortion, which I think is the grave sin, far worse than gay rights, far worse than even the trans ideology, of life that will, if God permits the earth to continue, of life that future generations will look back on, not the way we look at slavery, the way we would look at slavery if slavery involved murdering every black person. Nevertheless, we live in this broken and fallen world, and America is still better. Our way of life is still better, and our values are still better than in most of these places.
I think it's I'll take America over the Taliban any day of the week. I mean, that's why I'm living here and I don't want to move to Afghanistan. But broadly speaking, can I say that I recommend the American way of life as it stands right now? And the answer is no. It's not something that broadly to the entire world I want to broadcast and try to bring people into. I think the abortion thing, you know, that if we really take that seriously, just homing in on that for a second, if we really take seriously the idea that 900,000 human beings are being slaughtered every single year, you can make the argument, it's actually hard to find something worse than that. That's about 60 million human beings being killed in about 40 years ago. Yeah, so do we believe that or not? Do we actually take that seriously as a real death toll or not? And if we do, then we're in a pretty bad shape against almost anybody.
Right, but, well, not against almost anybody, because abortion is legal in many in almost every other Western nation. Because for most of our lives, abortion was mandatory in our only true rival superpower. So when you're still talking globally about the values that are being imported or exported around the world, then yeah, America's still better than China, even with those grievous sins. Because China has not all of the exact same, they have abortion, certainly, the same grievous sins, and more additional.
That's an okay argument, but it's not that great an argument. I think what Matt's saying does have a lot of weight.
There's also
wait a minute. I think there's this idea that we are slaughtering this many babies. Was it like 3,000 a day?
3,000 a day.
I think this should weigh on us a lot more heavily than it does. One of the great triumphs of the left is because we can't see the babies who are being killed. They've convinced us that they have no humanity, and if we could see them, what was happening, it would be on parallel with raping the young women of Afghanistan.
And,
and
if we were going to Afghanistan and then immediately forcing abortion on all women there, I think that would be a far graver.
Oh yeah,
sin,
no,
right?
I'm not.
I think that the big question in politics that people generally fail to ask is compared to whom or compared to.
I agree. I agree.
And so whenever
this is a great country if you survive birth.
Listen, you don't have to preach to me about it, but when it comes to the question of whether the United States has the right and/or obligation to push our values when we are so confused, discombobulated, and screwed up at home, I think the answer is compared to what? Because I think in certain circumstances the answer would probably be no, right? I mean, we would look at, like, if you were saying, do we need to pursue cultural imperialism with regard to a Western European country that happens to be stricter on abortion, say Ireland 4 years ago. Like, not France, right, or France, like, not really. Like, I don't see a need for us to be culturally imperialist on that. I don't see our need to be culturally imperialist with regard to wokeness. And so I think it's almost a non sequitur to say something like, the problems that we have at home are the problems that we are exporting abroad, when in large measure that is not true. The problems that we are having at home are problems that we are screwing ourselves up with at home, and a symptom of our failure to have any sort of heart for the fight for our own values, that we have no values. So what I would say is that our withdrawal from these places, our attempt to go isolation, is a symptom of our interior weakness, not reconsolidation. It's almost as though, like, you hear a lot of people on the right, we're spending all this money over here, let's bring that money home and we'll spend it on the border. I was like, well, yes, but that's not where any of that money is. Joe Biden's not going to take $1 of that or one soldier there and put that person on the border. It's not going to happen. So you're just doing a non sequitur now. You're just saying, I would like more security on the border, and also I don't want troops in Afghanistan. And that's not the same thing. You're going to have to show the connection between those two things. I can say it once. I hate wokeness. I think all of the stuff the left is pushing is serious garbage. And also, I don't understand how that is any comfort at all to anybody who is still trapped behind enemy lines in Afghanistan.
But it is true that within living memory, at least my living memory, it wasn't always so that this was a great country as compared to that's a new thing.
No, I don't think that's true. I mean, I think that, no, because I think that, I mean, and this is where you're going to get the argument. I mean, pick a period. Like, which period?
I think the period after World War II, this country actually entered a period of great
segregation there.
Yeah, I think if you're a black,
I didn't say that it was perfect. I didn't say that.
But then it is compared to what? The Soviet Union made this exact argument.
I know they did. No, that was what about it. The question is different.
And also to Matt, different point here. A lot of the way that we spread our imperial is through non-governmental channels, NGOs, literally, right? And we actually do spread abortion through NGOs, and it's something that we've had a lot of pushback from Africa. So one of the values we're spreading, I'm sorry to report, is abortion. And I think, Jeremy, well, you bring up this point about this guy Fuentes, who, but it's not just him, right? It's other people too, who will make this argument and say, are we so much better than the Taliban? And the reason that some people can make that argument with more credibility is because they have, as we joke, been kicked off of social media. They have been taken out of financial institutions. They've been put on the no-fly list without being accused of crime.
Yeah, we got some problems.
I guess my point again is discriminating, which is, I understand why some people would make even that semi-joking comparison when perhaps we would not.
I think that it's disingenuous to have this particular group of people evolve into some sort of tacit accusations that maybe we're not pure enough on the abortion issue.
No. Nobody's saying that.
I reject
That's not.
The abortion is likened to slavery in two ways, and totally different than slavery in both ways. It's like unto slavery in two ways. One, that it is culturally, in broad swaths of the culture, considered moral, even though it is wholly unrighteous. And it is likened to abortion in that it is somewhat ubiquitous. Slavery was ubiquitous in all of the world. Abortion is ubiquitous in all developed nations, really, on Earth. And that does kind of get out of jail free card for us where abortion is concerned. But it is to talk about the scope of the problem of abortion. That abortion does not make America unique.
And it also,
America is a grievous evil. Abortion is a grievous evil.
And we're worse at it than most of
It's not a unique evil.
that also, what you're talking about also, I think, can potentially mitigate to a certain extent the personal moral culpability of some individuals who choose abortion because they're in this environment where they're told by everybody that's okay. But in terms of the point that I was making anyway, is not about any individual here. It's actually all of us. I had this thought just the other day when we were going out to eat or something, and we passed by a Planned Parenthood, and which we all do all the time. We pass by Planned Parenthood, and I didn't even think much of it. I just went to eat, and only later did I stop and reflect. I'm like, I just passed by a building where they were killing babies, and it didn't even register fully on me as pro-life as I am, and as we all are. So this is like Drew pointed out, this is a success the left has had. This is something unique about abortion, that we don't see the victims, and so that prevents us all from fully confronting it. I think that if these were, and I'm sure I know we all agree, if these were 2-year-old children who were being, and we can see them being carted in by their parents to have their brain sucked out of their head, I wouldn't have been able to go eat. I mean, I would have had to charge in there and stop it. And we don't. None of us really have it.
Abortion is the Lord's of the Ring sin.
Yeah.
It's the sin that God can't see, right? It's the if you had the ring of power and you could turn yourself invisible, 100% of all men would go into the women's locker room. Like your very first thought, it'd be like, "Yep, women's locker room, here I am," just instantly, because God can. Because, and when I say God, I really mean man, because God knows heart, God's involved. But we reduce God down to us. We think so. Abortion is what it is, in particular because people don't see. Not only they don't see the crime, they don't see the criminal. And in that way, I mean, I will confess in various moments in my life, always thinking that abortion was a grievous crime. I've been confronted with the part of myself that could have snuck around and done that. Because I know what I would do if I know what I could do if I could get away with it. It's that Matthew's that passage of Jesus in the book of Matthew about adultery. If you lust after, you're an adulterer. If you have hate, you're a murderer. Not you're kind of like them, or you're on the path to being one. Yeah. You are one because you've revealed what you actually would be if no one was watching. Abortion just happens to be the one that actually no one is watching. We've actually run out of time, but rather than ending the show, I'm going to prolong the suffering because we promised that we would take some questions from our Daily Wire subscribers. They make it possible for us to conduct this crap show. I would argue that the longer the show goes, the more moral obligation we incur to our subscribers.
Now I even more strongly.
We should just withdraw.
The first question for the group: how will the reduction in American might and reputation have ramifications on other world events, namely China moving to Taiwan and Russia flexing its muscles in Eastern Europe? That's the question, Ben.
I mean, I think it's going to have dramatic ramifications. I think everybody who follows foreign policy can see people are talking openly in China about moving on Taiwan. Frankly, I think they'd be fools not to move on Taiwan before Joe Biden is out of office, because while the getting is good. I think you're going to start to. They may try to pursue the Hong Kong model of trying to pressure the government there into moving more pro-China because they feel like they're not going to get American support. So just basically softly take them over the way that they did Hong Kong before they marched over. But if China's on the march, they're taking advantage. Russia's on the march, they're taking advantage. We're not going to have any bases now, not only in Afghanistan, but also in Pakistan, so we have no ability. And Joe Biden talks about how we're going to have over-the-horizon capacity. We absolutely will not. In order to do that, you have to have people on the ground who actually know where to spot the actual bad guys. They can actually put a laser on it. There are guys who did it. So it's a disaster area and a wide array of foreign policy issues is the really short answer. And again, I think our enemies are looking at this. They are.
Yeah, to Drew's point, America is about to have to actually face the question of what is our role in the world. Do you think Biden is going to be impeached or is going to be forced to step down? That it is a good thing because Kamala is just as bad and also should be impeached. Kamala too, because she obviously had a part of this plan. Also, in fact, she right before it all went to crap, she made a major point of saying that she was very involved.
How incompetent do you have to be where you're like, okay, this thing is going to be just it, but I need to be on that bandwagon?
Well, don't forget, at that first speech, she wasn't there. I think she had to have her arm twisted a little. But to this point, I think I'll defer to the lawyer in the room, but as a simple matter of impeachment, maladministration is not a basis for impeachment. High crimes and misdemeanors is a basis for.
There's also nobody who's going to impeach.
Right, exactly.
I think the question of whether he will have to step down is unanswerable because he is such a. We just don't know how bad off he is. It's possible at some point they won't be able to hide him.
He looks the way he looked tonight.
Yeah.
He's running for re-election, but at the same time, they can't let Kamala.
I think he runs for re-election.
I think they will strap him to the horse and they will run down there.
I don't think either of them.
Did you just see? So the Yahoo headline just came out about his poll numbers, and they said this is really hurting Biden-Harris. Harris is only leading Trump by 2%. That was the headline. I said, wait, is she running? I didn't know that was part of the pack.
I'm kind of with Ben. I think that it'll be weekend at Bernie's. They are terrified. I mean, Kamala couldn't win primaries. She certainly isn't going to win. And, the idea that both the president and the vice president would not seek a second term against a Republican, I don't know if we've ever seen that.
I think that's going to happen. I really don't know the future, but I think that's going to happen. And I think it's very hard to know. It really is impossible to know what's going to happen with Biden because it may just be impossible to prop him up.
That's true. Do you believe the Biden administration will pay a ransom for remaining Americans who are left in Afghanistan before using military force?
For sure.
For sure. Yeah, exactly.
There are going to be pallets of cash that are shipped over there that we're never going to see.
There already are.
Probably 100%. By the way, that actually is an impeachable offense.
Yeah.
So you're not right. I mean, that actually is. So if we start shipping money over there without any sort of congressional approval to a terrorist group, then that actually is.
But who's going to do it?
Right. But I mean, just a legal question. By the way, to the legal question, the real answer is it doesn't matter because impeachment is a political exercise, right? So it doesn't really matter.
What are the chances that China decides it's time to go after Taiwan? I mean, we've basically all
100%. And if I were China, I'd certainly do it in the next 3 years because we don't know what's coming.
And by the way, who exactly is going to oppose them? I mean, to speak of like the West and its restrictions on freedom, it makes more sense to have that conversation less in the guise of the Taliban than it does with regard to China, considering the Chinese social credit system, considering how Australia is currently locking its citizens down. Did you see the video from 9 News?
Yes.
And it was like I was just waiting for and then there was the guy who's coming down the elevator, and then the anchor's like, his name is, and I was like, waiting for them to release the hound on montage.
I agree.
You're the only person who got the reference, but I was like, it's the end of Fahrenheit 451. He's running for the river, and you've got the hound following him because he might have COVID and he's asymptomatic. It's unbelievable.
It is the fall of the West right now, and it is the Chinese moment. I mean, you wrote your book, The Authoritarian Moment, and really what you mean, in some ways, is that this is the Chinese moment. There have been, for the last 25 years, there have been two models that were sort of dominant. There's the Western model, basically the American model. Now, in Europe, it's further left, and it has more parliamentary system, and it has bigger social welfare. That's essentially the post-war American order. And what we're seeing, to some degree even domestically, which is very concerning, is that in some ways both left and right are looking at China now and saying, this system of strong authoritarian regimes with liberal economics may be scalable in a way
this happened before World War II, too. There are plenty of people in America who are going like, Hitler was such a bad guy. He's got a point.
Do you believe that this is a combination of idiocy, incompetence, naivety, or intentional? In other words, are they trying to inflame the American populace and thereby increase military operations?
I think it's I've heard the conspiracy, if you want to call it that conspiracy theory, that this is a purposeful attempt to debilitate us and demoralize us. I just don't think that that's smart, to be honest with you.
Joe Biden is a
He's a moron.
I suppose the
and he
only
always was, even before.
Correct.
To put my tinfoil hat on, though, if I could stand up for the question, to Ben's point, the people do not control foreign policy, or at least have not in many years. And we know that the bureaucracy of foreign policy establishment does not want to pull out of Afghanistan. And we know that Joe Biden's not running the show. And so there is the question. I don't want to ascribe to malice that which is explained by stupidity and incompetence, and there was a lot of that. We left a lot of stuff behind at Bagram. We left a lot of stuff behind in the country. 75,000 vehicles, over 200 aircraft, 600,000 firearms.
a million rounds of ammo.
And I mean, we're missing an arm's worth of stuff. That is either historic incompetence or there were competing.
I think we're missing an option. I think part of the problem is that people around our country don't really care that much about Americans or our country at all. So I think there's also.
Joe Biden's always been headed a particularly stupid idea at the moment, right? And it's like, what if we just took this country and we sliced it in three? You're like, well, there are no natural resources in 1/3 of that country. So and he's like, I don't care, man. Come on, man.
Come on.
And it's that here too, right? Again, didn't the press conference today where he's like, all my generals agree. He kept saying this over and over, right?
Not all my generals. All the higher ups in the military.
Right.
Which actually extends even beyond. Like, one person has to say, I mean, I didn't.
Right. By the way, it's not true. We have many, many stories of all his guys going, you can't pull out this way, and he's like, we're doing it. And then he's like, but they also agree we should not defend Bagram. It's like, oh, you mean once you said we could have 2 troops, and you could put 2 troops in one place? They said, let's do Kabul instead of Bagram? Wow, big agreement there, but it is amazing.
I do think that we can't talk about it on this show because we got to go home. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I do think that there is a case to be made that our intelligence services are infiltrated by our enemies.
Yes, there is, of course.
Yeah, and you know, the thing, we talk about the big things.
I'm not committing suicide. If I die,
That's why. Wrote a McAfee-esque letter.
You did just give up the whole plot. Biden's not going to run, Kamala's not going to run, and Hillary's going to be president. You're in real trouble. We talk about the big things, Humvees, you know, armored vehicles, airplanes, helicopters. 16,000 pairs of night vision goggles that I'm the most worried about. Our special operators have ruled Afghanistan truly for the last 20 years. They're the most lethal fighting men that have ever existed in all of human history, and their superpower is that they can see in the dark. Yeah. That's their superpower, and we just gave the enemy the superpower. The good news is, where are they going to buy batteries? That's all the time we have for tonight. We want to especially thank our DailyWire.com subscribers for being patient with us tonight. It took us a minute to get to your questions. But we're grateful that you are with us. Thank you all for tuning in. As always, happy to have you join us. We would love for you to become a subscriber. Go over to dailywire.com/subscribe. Get a Reader's Pass trial. You can do it for just $4. You'll get 4 weeks for free, $4 a month. And I like to think it's the gateway drug to the full Daily Wire experience. We'll hope to see you here next time. Adios. Daily Wire Backstage is produced by Mathis Glover. Executive producer is me, Jeremy Bourne. Our technical director is Austin Stevens. Our production manager is Pavel Wadowski. Studio and equipment management is by Patrick Kidd. And broadcast engineering is by Mark Herman. Editing is by Jim Nichol. Audio is mixed by Mike Borlino. And our audio assistant is Israel McFarland. Playback is operated by McKenna Waters. Hair and makeup by Nika Geneva. Daily Wire Backstage is a Daily Wire production. Copyright Daily Wire 2021. Some days you can't even
and Jeremy were all just kind of fighting about Afghanistan. It was really intense. I really enjoyed it. And I felt everyone made good arguments. Some people made better arguments than others, I would say, but it was really good. So we want to up the ante a little bit more. Instead of just tuning in from your home, you'll be able to see us live on stage right at the Ryman Auditorium here in Nashville. Join me, Jeremy, Ben, Matt, Candace, Owen, we're backstage. We have a very special offer for our members. If you're a special 12-hour window head of general admission tomorrow, Thursday, September 2nd at 10 a.m. It's only 12 hours, but it's a decent amount of time, so go in there, check the special code you can use to pre-order your tickets. You're just going to have to wait until tickets Mark your calendar, make sure you don't miss out. I mentioned yesterday a teacher who posted a TikTok video. The video was joking about how she does not have a class. So her students are supposed to allegiance, but she says you don't need to stand, you need to utter the pledge. And then some of the students said, well, if we don't have a flag, so we're not pledging allegiance. She said, oh, we have a flag. She pointed to the rainbow, the Pride Progress flag, which isn't even just a gay thing, it's like a gay race. It's like all the flag for leftism. Imperial leftism that's beyond national borders that is supposed to replace the American flag. So yesterday on the show, I said that teacher should be fired. I don't think there's, first of all, I don't think there's any guarantee of academic freedom in the third grade classroom or whatever. I think our understanding of academic freedom was the point of his book, God and Man, E.L. Superstitions of Academic Freedom, that launched the post-war conservative movement. And by the way, just speaking of that book, there is a new edition, a 70th anniversary edition of that book coming out, and I'm very honored to report that I got to write the introduction to this new edition of the book. It's the book that started it all, the post-war conservative movement, and so I'm pleased to be able to offer an introduction. Unfortunately, we've forgotten what I said in that. This teacher does not have any right to do this. Okay? So the good news is she's being investigated. There's an official investigation from the Newport Mesa Unified School District in Orange County. The teacher's name is Kristen Pitson, and she might lose her job, as she should. She should. I don't think that this woman should be thrown in prison. I don't think she should be completely ostracized from society. I think she should be allowed to go get another job somewhere else, but just not a teaching job, because she's a bad teacher. Her teaching is contrary to the best interests of a student, if the student wants to be educated, and the teaching is distinctly anti-American. One of the purposes of education, especially public education, is to make citizens. Make good citizens. And what she is doing is making bad citizens. She's discouraging students from being good citizens. And she's filling their heads with a lot of claptrap that is wrong and bad for them. So she should not hesitate. She should be allowed to go to a job. Be allowed to go to a job wherever she wants. There need to be consequences. And we, the people, have the right to have a say. The LA Teachers Union has more demands. You know, during COVID, the LA Teacher Union, they misinterpreted the COVID lockdowns as a semi-permanent vacation for teachers who are already overpaid. So the LA Teacher Union is now back. They're not just demanding, whatever, changed hours and plexiglass and open windows and certain school sizes and classroom changes. They're not just demanding that. They're demanding a mandatory vaccine for all students. This is not about the students, because students have a very, very low risk of facing serious complications with coronavirus. This is about the teachers protecting themselves. Even though the teachers face, generally speaking, very low risk of serious complications from the coronavirus. They are going to force students to take an experimental drug that the students really don't need to protect themselves. Some call this stuff. There's the mother. I don't know what school district it is, but this mother shows up in a beautiful dress, a beautiful flowers, very articulate. Gives a very good presentation, very persuasive. She herself is a nurse, or RN. She's got 2 kids. And she wants the school board to stop being so demonic.
My name is Melissa. I have 2 daughters and a sister. These are demonic entities, and we need to stick together. Remember, we have authority in Christ Jesus. These are demonic entities. All school boards, all United States of America, and all of us Christians will be sticking together to take them all. All the police officers that kick us out for our First Amendment right will also be going down with them. Do you understand? I'm a nurse, infectious disease, 13 years. Mass doctor. These doctors that sit up here that were sneering at us, looking at us like we're scumbags, they need to go back to medical school.
You're out of order. Please, this is your last warning. Communication.
They need to remember, natural immunity is best. You are all demonic entities. You are going to be taken down.
He still might be the producers are telling me this is can't leave her. Oh, Michael, she's crazy. She's talking crazy. She's, sure, I know it, like, it sounds kind of crazy and everything, but, show me the lie. Show me the lie. She says that natural immunity is a good thing and the scientific establishment is completely ignoring it. That's obviously true. She's pointing out that the kids don't need to take these insane precautions because the kids aren't particularly good, so that's obviously true. And her most outlandish claim is that demons exist and exert an influence on the world, which is just obviously true. Okay, I'm not saying that these particular school board members are possessed or obsessed by demons, but like, I don't know, maybe. If that's the most outlandish religious claim that this woman is making, then it seems way less outlandish than the religious claims that the left is making. Here are some religious claims that the left makes regularly. Boys can become girls.